The Samsung HW-Q990C is an 11.1.4 channel soundbar which houses a whopping 22 audio drivers. Now in this review, I'm going to be comparing it to its predecessor, the HW-Q990B, which I also previously reviewed, and some of its competitors. Furthermore, we're going to see if it's actually worth its price tag, because at the time of filming and in the UK, it can be found for £1,230, while in the US it can be found for $1,350. Indeed, that is roughly a £200 or $200 price increase over its predecessor. So to kick things off, I would like to talk about its design, and here the product dimensions will be on your screen so you can size it up for yourself. In my case, I've got it on a cabinet and it's placed in front of a 55-inch Q9FN, and it actually fits pretty perfectly. Of course, you can wall mount the soundbar if you so wish, and in this respect you have got the wall mount brackets which are within the box. Now aside from this, you have got the wireless speakers, which are pretty stylish and house 3 audio drivers per side, which is certainly impressive. However, they do have to be plugged in permanently to a wall socket, and this is actually quite surprising because Samsung owns JBL, and ironically the latter brand actually produces the Bar 1300 and Bar 1300X, depending which territory you're in, and they actually have a battery power function. It would have been great to see this also filtered through to the HW-Q990C, or for example its predecessor, the Q990B. Now as for the 8-inch subwoofer, it does also wirelessly connect over to the main soundbar unit, and I didn't incur any sort of issues when it came to latency while watching movies, music, or indeed gaming. However, it would have been appreciated to see a hardwired connection, like you'd find on alternatives from Creative or for example Sennheiser. Alas, that's not the case, so you can't fully reduce the overall latency. Still, over here, the overall design and aesthetics of the soundbar and the subwoofer are certainly appealing, and therefore I've got no real inherent complaints. Now, very much on that point, I really do appreciate that you have got a forward-facing LCD display, which gives you an indication of the settings that you're adjusting or indeed the metadata that's being fed through to this soundbar. Equally, I really love the fact that you've got physical control buttons at the top of the soundbar, which isn't the same that could be said about some of its competitors or indeed some of the older Samsung models. Furthermore, you have of course got a wireless remote, which allows you to adjust any sort of settings from afar. Now aside from the remote, you have also got the ability to wirelessly control your soundbar from afar using the Samsung SmartThings app. Now here you can adjust the source, which is quite handy. You can also adjust the volume and mute it, and you can go between the different sound modes. Now the one I prefer is adaptive sound, but in terms of the standard mode preset, you will able to see that you've also got an advanced EQ. Now the advanced EQ is not available in the other sound modes where you've only got bass and treble. Here you can see my settings. Now past that, you've got independent controls for the subwoofer, which is certainly appreciated, and then you've also got the ability to toggle on and off space fit sound, which I'll touch upon later, and active voice amplifier. Now the latter option effectively analyzes your room for any sort of audio, for example, let's say a vacuum cleaner, and tries to counteract it with different sounds. Therefore, let's say for example boosting up the mids. Now it's not something I actually use because I was in a quiet room, but it's something that you might want to play around with depending on your own scenario. Now as for the advanced sound settings, there's voice enhancement, bass enhancement and night mode, all of which are pretty self-explanatory, and I actually touch upon voice enhancement very shortly, and it's actually very handy in certain scenarios. For example, if you're listening to a podcast, a piece to camera, or indeed watching the news. Now you've also got the ability to connect over to the SmartThings hub, but in this respect it's not something I use. This is for example using it with other smart connected devices. Now over here you've also got device settings where you can also see your network status, Bluetooth pairing mode, and also adjust every single channel level, which is absolutely phenomenal. Here you can see my own settings, but this is all very much your own room's acoustics, so definitely do play around as to what works best for you. It's great to see such customization via the app. Then you've got the ability to enable or disable an audio feedback, and you can also change the way that the rear speakers are set up, either rear or front. In other words, they're placed next to the soundbar. Very much depends on how you've set it up yourself. Then you've also got the Alexa settings and Spotify settings, and finally you can check for a firmware update by going to the Information tab. So moving swiftly on, let's talk about connectivity, more specifically wireless. And here you have got Bluetooth, where the lowest quality SBC codec is supported only. When will Samsung integrate a higher quality codec? I have no idea. Nonetheless, you have also got a tap sound functionality which allows you to quickly pair up to the soundbar. However, you have also got Wi-Fi connectivity, which is certainly appreciated. In this respect, it gives you the functionalities via the SmartThings app, as I did mention before, and you've also got Apple AirPlay 2 and supposedly Spotify Connect, which I don't personally use, so I can't exactly attest to. However, what I do use is Google Chromecast, and in this respect, it is actually not exactly supported on my tested unit. I say that because on the spec sheet, at least on Samsung UK's website, Chromecast has got a yes next to it, but I cannot see it actually working in the slightest. Now past that, you have also got the ability to enable and disable Amazon Alexa, which is directly built into the soundbar. Of course, for those people like myself that do not use Amazon Alexa, you might want to fully disable it. In this respect, you can fully disable the microphone by pressing a physical button found at the top of the soundbar, and you'll hear mic off. And of course, if you want to enable it, mic on. So there you go. So it's quite handy to do that. And of course, again, if you do not want to use it, you don't have to. Now, aside from this, one of the key features of this soundbar in comparison to some of its competitors is the support for wireless Dolby Atmos, which is actually quite intriguing. But unfortunately, very much like my previous review of the Q990B, I've actually got no means of testing it. And indeed, this is because I do not have a modern Samsung television. Now, on that note, given the fact that I've also got an older generation television, it does not also natively support Dolby Atmos. Thankfully, I can get around this by plugging my 4K Blu-ray player directly into the Samsung soundbar, which does feed through Dolby Atmos, and in fact 4K, 60Hz, and also HDR support as well. Now, you have also got an optical output as well, which can be connected over to your television, but I would suggest HDMI. Here you've got HDMI eARC, which is also backwards compatible with the ARC standard. Now, what is disappointing, however, is the fact that you do not have 4K 120 support. Indeed, for those people who have modern day consoles wanting to output the higher refresh rate, you will not be able to. You'll of course be able to downscale to 1080p to run at 120Hz, or of course have to make do with 4K at 60Hz. Given this is a modern flagship Samsung soundbar, one might have expected at least a singular HDMI 2.1 port to cater for certain individuals. Alas, that's not the case. So with all that out of the way, let's get on to a sound demo. I do appreciate it's not going to be ideal over YouTube, specifically using my microphones, but it'll give you a little bit of a taster as to what to expect from the soundbar. First off, I'll be playing back Priya J's track, which is titled Like Me, and I'll also be toggling through the different sound modes, so make sure you check out the annotations on your screen. Equally, I'll be going to a piece to camera whereby I'll be presenting the Audi Q8 e-tron on Totally EV. In this respect, I'll be trying to demonstrate the voice enhancement feature, so yet again do check out the annotations to understand how this soundbar is actually operating. These replace the e-tron and the e-tron S respectively. Now the Q8 starts from £67,000. If however you go for the larger battery pack 55 e-tron, that costs you £77,000. Of course that's without adding any additional options, or of course if you go for this press vehicle or the top spec Vossprung version, you're going to be shelling out £95,000. So in this review, seeing if the vehicle is actually worth its price tag and how it compares to its predecessor and its modern rivals. Now moving past the audio demos, I would like to mention its speaker configuration, and here you've got 22 audio drivers and an 11.1.4 channel setup. Indeed the 0.4 is referencing the upward facing drivers, and you've got 2 within the main soundbar unit, 1 within each extremity and 1 within each of the wireless speakers. Speaking of which, over here, the wireless speakers have also got a total of 3 audio drivers per side, and here you've got upward, front and sideward facing drivers. Now, as the main soundbar unit goes, you have got those upward facing drivers, front facing drivers, sideward facing drivers, and front sideward facing drivers. And indeed you have got a huge tally of audio drivers that are comprised within this main soundbar unit. As for the wireless subwoofer, it houses an 8-inch audio driver. It is sideward facing. Now, aside from that, you would also like to know the overall total wattage claim, but unfortunately, according to Samsung UK's website, there's no actual means of getting this data. But going based its predecessor and some of the online sources I found, it hovers between 650 watts and 670 watts. Now also in terms of the frequency range, I do not actually have the overall frequency response of it, but one can only imagine it's somewhat similar to its predecessors, and in this respect will tail off at roughly 35 Hz. But again, I could be mistaken, because that's just going from my own experience and my own tests. Now, apart from that, I would also like to highlight that I did not have access to the Samsung Q Symphony feature. This effectively integrates the speakers found within modern Samsung televisions with the soundbar, and therefore gives you a little bit more of an enveloping sort of sound. Alas, I do not have a modern Samsung television, as I've highlighted before, and therefore I could not benefit from this feature. Now, what I can test, however, is SpaceFit Sound Pro. Now, this is effectively an auto EQ, at least according to the manufacturer, which uses the microphone position within the main soundbar unit, and also calibrates the subwoofer. Now, in my case, I actually had this disabled because I didn't see any sort of inherent benefits. In this respect, you can also toggle it on and off, so therefore it's just a great feature that you can play around with. But in this respect, it cannot compete with some soundbars out there, for example from the likes of JBL or Sennheiser, which actually offer you a proper calibration or indeed give you better sort of room calibration. This is because they are able to play certain sounds and calibrate it, be it via a dedicated microphone unit that you plug into the soundbar, or indeed using your smartphone, or for example the wireless speakers. Now, aside from all of this, how does the soundbar actually perform? Well, let me break it down in terms of the sound frequency range, starting off with the sub-bass response. And indeed over here you've got a decent low-end rumble, giving you good excitement when you're listening back to your favourite EDM, R&B or D&B tracks, and indeed when you're watching any sort of movies with a lot of action. But unfortunately over here it cannot compete with certain soundbars out there. For example, the JBL Bar 1300 or 1300X gives you a little bit of a better low-end prowess, and equally systems out there that have a dedicated subwoofer add-on, for example the ones from Harman Kardon, Sonos or indeed Sennheiser, the latter being my favourite, do actually do a phenomenal job in the sub-bass response. And that's because they actually extend even lower, whereby for example the Sennheiser gets all the way down to 27 Hz. Audiophiles out there will say that some of their hi-fi systems will do even better, and of course they will, but of course here we're looking at an all-in-one sort of solution. So comparing and contrasting with some of its competitors, the Samsung flagship soundbar can't quite compete, but still does a decent job. Now, as for the mid-bass, it's actually pinpoint accurate and absolutely phenomenal. I had no problems whatsoever when it came to the overall precision of the bass, indeed when I was watching, let's say, action films, or indeed when I was listening back to more challenging audio tracks, which had a little bit more of that sort of bass rumble to them, and indeed a little bit of a bass hit as well. Now, the same couldn't be quite said about its mids. Now, don't get me wrong, the overall mid-range of this soundbar is absolutely incredible and jaw-dropping. But if I'm comparing it to some of the flagship soundbars out there, for example, the Sennheiser Ambeo Max, or indeed, for example, some offerings from likes of Harman Kardon or indeed Sonos, these actually excel a little bit better in terms of giving you a little bit more of a forward-sounding mid-range. Still, in the grander scheme of things, I've got no real complaint, just the fact that you should be aware that it has a slight V-shaped or warmer sound signature, which isn't exactly a bad thing to say the least. Now, as for the highs, they extend tremendously well, so much so that I was just left absolutely gobsmacked as to how good this soundbar did. Indeed, in this respect, I feel it's been a little bit tuned over its predecessor, the Q990B, and therefore gives you a little bit of that extra sort of toe-tapping feeling. In this respect, this soundbar is pretty much unrivaled. Now, equally, the same could be said about its overall soundstage reproduction, which is absolutely incredible. In this respect, the Samsung Q990C very much follows on from the Q990B in delivering a really great soundstage. Indeed, the overall width and depth, specifically thanks to the wireless speakers, and the overall instrument separation is absolutely unparalleled. In this respect, when you're watching movies, you'll really feel engaged. Speaking of which, let's get on to a movie demo. I'll be playing Age of Extinction, which is Transformers of course, and playing back certain different tracks. In this respect, going via Dolby Atmos and then going to Dolby Digital. Make sure you check out the annotations on your screen to understand the metadata that is in use.
Moving your way.
Now yet again, an audio demo over YouTube isn't exactly ideal, but when you're sat in front of the soundbar while appreciating the heightened metadatas of Dolby Atmos or DTS:X, you're going to be left absolutely jaw-dropped. It's something a microphone really cannot keep up, and therefore you will just have to experience it in person. Just take it from myself to say that this soundbar is pretty much unrivaled in this department. Indeed, in this respect, you'll hear a sort of helicopter flying above you, at least you think it is. You hear gunshots coming from left and right, great sort of instrument separation, and vocal tracks that are not drowned out. Overall over here, the overall experience that one attains, specifically while watching movies with heightened metadata, is absolutely phenomenal. Now ultimately, this leads me on to my verdict. Now the Q990C is pretty much an update over the Q990B. Not a massive one, but a small little incremental update here and there. Specifically, for example, with the adaptive sound, which has been tuned a little bit, and I didn't really comment about it because I didn't actually have problems with the Q990B. Now really, this is one of the best soundbars that one can buy. Now I appreciate it's actually more expensive than the Q990B. I would definitely suggest that if you can get your hands on the Q990B at the time of watching, then definitely do get its predecessor because it just comes in at a cheaper price point. If however that becomes discontinued and you cannot find it, or indeed the Q990C drops in price, then you should certainly get it. Now as a result of this, and of course given the overall competencies that I've highlighted in this review, I can definitely see myself recommending it, and as such it gets my Best Buy award. Now I'd be curious to know what you make of it down in the comments section below, and of course if you've liked this independent detailed review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.